welcome to How to Win Holiday 2021, Not Your Average Q4, hosted by Direct Agents. My name is Megan Conahan. I'm an EVP at Direct Agents.
And I'm Jonny Waite. I'm VP of Search at Direct Agents.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I will say before we get started, if you do have any questions as we go through, please do your best to chat them to us. And if we have time, we'll get to them at the end. So today we're going to be covering 4 main topics. First is just changes in consumer behavior and holiday trends in general. There's obviously been a lot going on recently. People have changed their buying behavior. They're changing their Q4 behavior. So we're going to quickly touch on what those trends are. 2, we want to prepare everybody for some rising costs if you haven't seen them already, which I'm sure you have. What rising costs mean for you? What are some tactics that you can do to mitigate that? 3rd, we're going to touch on just some tactics that you can implement today to really make a big impact in your Q4, things that you can start pretty much as soon as next week. And then lastly, the impact of iOS 14 and how that's going to affect some of your 2022 media planning. So we can just jump right into it. So first and foremost, like I said, we did want to start with trends, and I think the trends really set up for the tactics and the recommendations later. And the 2 first big macro trends that we're going to talk about really are going to impact your entire Q4. And the first one is that this is going to be your largest digital Q4 to date. You know, we saw this last year in 2020, and there's just been a big shift in consumer behavior. More people are buying online. They got comfortable doing it last year, and it has just become habit. I think the eMarketer stat was about 18% growth in e-commerce sales in 2021 for digital, which is quite massive. So you're going to see a really big uptick in digital in Q4. A recent, I think, Shopkick study, it was around 60% of people said they're going to primarily buy online for their holiday shopping, and about 70% or so said that they were going to use Amazon as their primary shopping destination, which I thought was kind of interesting. Add to that, a lot of those big box retailers are closed. You have Walmart and Target being closed on really major shopping holidays like Thanksgiving, for example. And then people are just in a different place. I heard the term revenge spending the other day, and I was like, ooh, I love that. I feel like I've been doing that for years though. But people are like ready to get out and see other people and travel and be with family and friends that they weren't with last year. So you are just going to see a general uptick in customer sentiment and customer kind of purchase behavior in general. So that's really exciting to see. And I think for marketers, we have to prepare for that. The second trend is that holidays are going to start earlier this year. We saw it last year. Mostly because Prime Day kicked off in October and because of fulfillment and shipping delays, which we're also facing again this year, which Jonny will talk a little bit more about later. But in general, we really primed consumers last year to get started on shopping earlier. So we're going to see it again. A recent Google stat said 30% of people have already started holiday shopping June of this year. So I am so behind. I did not realize how behind I was. But people have started. They've started researching. They've started saying, what will my loved ones want for this holiday season? So not only are people going to spend more this Q4, it's going to start much, much earlier. So we just all have to be prepared for that. The next big trend that we're seeing is really mega sale days redefining the holiday season. And when I say mega sale days, I'm saying like Prime Day, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Small Business Saturday, all of those big kind of like points in time where you can point and say, okay, this is when I'm going to have a discount or a sale. They've always been really big for businesses and really big for brands, but it has just grown really significantly. And you can see the 2020 growth on the chart over here on the right. In 2020, we saw 30% growth in Black Friday and 18% growth in Cyber Monday. And these numbers are only going to continue to increase. The one thing I thought was really interesting here is that after about 18 months or however long we've been in this pandemic for, people have had that sense of isolation. They're really looking to feel like part of a community. So people who are even buying from mega sale days are saying they do it because they feel that sense of community. They feel like, oh, they're part of something bigger, buying with Prime Day or Small Business Saturday or participating in Giving Tuesday. It really does help them feel like that part of a little bit less isolated, which I thought was kind of a fascinating stat. So really try to think about how you can lean into that sense of community. I know Jonny has some really great ideas for you later on that. Jonny, these are things that are happening this year, but they started all in 2020, right? We saw bigger mega sale days in 2020. We saw more digital shoppers in 2020. We saw a lot of net new customers come to brands last year. So what are we seeing? Are these people, if they bought from you last year, are they going to be more likely to buy from you again this year? What does that look like? What's retention look like?
Yeah, I think those are all fair and very good questions. I think this, the title of this webinar kind of speaks volumes. It's not your average Q4. It's not your average year. I think as marketers, as brands, even as just people, we know that anything we took for granted is kind of falling by the wayside.
Yep.
A lot of the trends that we're seeing are, either micro or macro anomalies. I think to answer your question in a really succinct way, the answer is no. In general, people are not going to be loyal to brands. So we're not, even a year ago, 2 years ago, the brands that were winning in the space or the brands that were really digitally transforming, may have either supersized over pandemic or completely gone away. And I think last year especially really prepared consumers to not necessarily trust the supply chain. I don't think it's through any fault of the brands. I think there were a lot of different things with manufacturing, raw materials, that I think it was natural to take those for granted, and now we can't. And I think consumers have learned that, number one, there are new brands emerging faster than ever before that could have an even better product than the brands they used to trust. I think number two, they're open to exploring brands online or brick and mortar that can guarantee the product and the time that they state. So, the general stat right now is that 50% of consumers consumers are considering 50% more brands in their shopping consideration. And they're really swayed by convenience and shipping, which we're going to go through in detail a little bit more. But and this is a global trend. This is not, we're not talking about the US, we're not talking about North America, we're talking about across the globe. So I think if you're a brand and you're, watching this or you're considering, how should you prepare? I think really don't rest on your laurels. Don't rest on the promotions or the holiday plans that you had last year. Really kind of take a objective look at your planning, at your holiday planning, at your Q1 planning in 2022, and just kind of understand that this may be an era where you have to win back consumers, and you have to do that overtly and consistently. And then I did want to go through, a couple things, in regard to the type of content that's going to help draw users in. And again, I do want to state that this is not your normal Q4. This is not going to be our normal Q1. So it kind of takes fresh eyes every month, every quarter to look at these things and reevaluate. So while we're going to put forth trends that we need, brands and marketers alike really need to kind of jump onto, need to start activating now, by the time we hit January, February, March, that may have changed and we have to repivot again.
Fun.
Well, that's the fun of being a marketer. That's the fun of being in kind of a digital age. But I think when we talk about being agnostic or the next big thing in marketing, I think everybody could agree that TikTok comes up probably the most, if not, it's always in that conversation. But stepping away from that, it's not just TikTok, it's the form of content that TikTok hosts. So it's a lot of UGC, natural, user-generated type of content. And the consumers, especially as younger generations, Gen Z, the latter half of the millennials has more buying power. They're going to have more say in the power of social platforms, especially from a marketing and e-commerce perspective. And I think what we've seen more and more is that type of UGC be the type of content that's going to make you a brand that stands out. So I think while you're considering how you're talking about, supply chain, how you're talking about promotion, shipping, all of those different considerations, you also have to objectively look at your media mix and say, what can't I rely on anymore, or what's not guaranteed rather. And we're going to get into some trends later about, the rising costs of traditional digital platforms and what to do about that, the changes in privacy. We're going to go through all those different things. But Megan, I know that you and I have been talking a lot about how, not just how you look at channel selection or platform selection, but really what your focus should be in growing your brand over time. So can you kind of jump into the trends you've been seeing as far as discoverability and mid and top funnel tactics?
Yeah, and I think your point about TikTok is really interesting because I saw a recent stat, and I honestly can't remember where I found this, but it was something about 50% of people who are on TikTok said they bought a brand from TikTok, right? And I don't think that most brands, one, I feel like a lot of brands still aren't live on TikTok in a really meaningful way. But two, I don't think that they figured out the direct response component of it quite yet either. But people are buying, right? They're there and they're buying from TikTok, whether it's, attributable or not. I think that is really important. I think the UGC point of that is really interesting because we are starting to see just shoppers in general want more from their experiences with brands, right? We call it shoppertainment. They want UGC, they want to interact with influencers, they want immersive experiences, they want live stream shopping. All of these things are really important for them because they want this live kind of immersive experience without being almost like in real life, but not going into a real life store, which I completely agree with. I love watching influencer content. I love watching live stream shopping. You can see it. You can see somebody feel it. You can see somebody kind of like touch the item or clothing or put on the pair of shoes. You can see what it looks like. But at the same time, those might not be necessarily direct response kind of DR tactics that you might think of. But you really do have to think about using influencer, using lifestyle, using UGC when you can for those top of funnel type of programs, and really focus on just letting your down funnel do what it does best and convert. Look at, and we're going to talk about some other things that you can do to rethink your KPIs and all of that, because I think that is really, really important. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is that we're starting to see less engagement with our traditional ad units, right? Like we're starting to see people even just engage more with these more interesting advertainment style ad units and less with the traditional 300 by 250 or social ad unit or whatever it might be, especially if they're not refreshed frequently, which often they aren't, and especially if they are not personalized. So you're going to start seeing a decrease in engagement in those more salesy traditional ads because people are kind of going a little bit blind to them in a way, those non-native ad units. So really rethinking the type of creative and messaging and experiences that you're putting out there and making sure that they are inspiring and making sure that they're really engaging. And again, it might not be the most direct response tactic, but it's building your top of funnel, it's building your mid funnel, and then you can really focus on your bottom funnel, again, doing what it does best, converting those people, getting them to purchase, etc. Obviously, starting a live shopping campaign right now is probably a lot to ask of people. It's, end of August. Maybe you could pull it off and kudos to you if you can. But Jonny, do you want to touch on the last two trends that I think maybe are more attainable for marketers to maybe lean into a little bit? Sure.
So there's probably not going to be a lot of surprises here, but and we're going to repeat this several times, and it's going to sound redundant, but it's really only because it's so important. Yes. Like I said before, we've been talking about, it's, brands are really in either dangerous or advantageous spot right now. Advantageous in the sense that if they do it right, it doesn't necessarily need to be outspending the competition. It's really kind of shifting the focus to what a consumer's expecting. And holiday's interesting because usually, it's August and we're talking about holiday shopping, holiday planning, which seems very odd. But because of all the things we experienced last holiday, over the past year and a half, 2 years, it's just consumer behavior changing. So unsurprisingly, shipping, guaranteed shipping, calling out shipping, what's available, what your brand can do. Even honestly, if it's not as fast as 2-day prime shipping, what people are used to with Amazon, or if it's guaranteed delivery, at least there is something stated about shipping, so the expectation is there. There's a stat put forth, I think it's by a marketer, but 70% of consumers are swayed in their buying decision based on shipping. 70%. Now this is for digital, but as we talked about in our holiday planning last year, that big chunk of people that were not buying online pre-pandemic, that migration's happened. So we're talking about 3/4 of the population buying online for holiday shopping. And like you said, some of the retail stores don't even, the big retailers don't have the option to go in the store. So that shipping component, 70%, while it seems aggressive, if you kind of step back and look at it, probably not. So, if you're a brand or you're a marketer working on, your different brands for holiday planning, shipping needs to be stated. And I think the other point is buy now, pay later, and just purchase options in general. So buy now, pay later is an interesting one, and it might not seem related, but kind of just hear us out. There's been an 81% shift since we talked about it last year. And last year it was a big trend. So, when we think about buy now, pay later, most brands are thinking, okay, based on price point, why would this even be necessary? And if we look at the, again, from eMarketer, the graph to the right, the biggest reason users use buy now, pay later is because they don't want to pay credit card interest. So, thinking about our own holiday shopping behavior, oftentimes we use our credit cards for the points, or we don't want to drain our checking account, but we need to make everything, all those purchases in bulk. So this is a similar kind of mentality. So regardless of price point, everybody's kind of shifting that way, and that expectation's there. So they kind of coincide with how the expectation of users is changing. Shipping we knew last year, shipping we knew a few years ago because, Amazon and Prime shipping started to change that consumer behavior. But now that a lot of brands have adopted this and it's relatively easy to integrate a buy now, pay later platform onto your D2C site, it is becoming a lot more feasible and we're going to see it more and more as time progresses. So while this isn't the golden goose or the most surprising, kind of tactics to win in Q4 this year, they are simple, important, and things that really need to be addressed before we get into all the other nuances. Now, as we talk about all these different things in our next section, I'm curious, Megan, on your take of what you're seeing be the biggest trends that, in regards to increased costs, competition, what's changing on these bigger tech platforms. You alluded to all of that kind of shifting when you talked about discoverability, TikTok, and maybe areas that bigger brands haven't traditionally invested in. But what are you seeing as kind of macro trends in regards to that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're paying attention, and I'm sure anybody, if you're watching this webinar, you're seeing this already. Just costs have gone up pretty much across the board, and as a combination of increased competition. Jonny, you mentioned there's just more brands in this space, more brands that maybe were spending on sending to in-store that are now focusing on .com. Like everyone's doing this run on digital. And what that means is that combined with the iOS 14 update, CPMs are just going up. I have a stat or chart on the slide. Cost of or spend has gone up about, based on our data, 70% year over year, Q2 to Q2. That's massive, right? And CPMs have followed that, increasing by about 30% year over year as well. This is not unique to Facebook. This is Facebook. They are obviously one of the ones that have seen the biggest growth. A recent stat, I think Snapchat and Pinterest were up 2x year over year in costs. This is just happening across the board. Costs are just going up. And why it's so important to talk about the trends first before we go into the increased costs is because we need to know what consumers are really looking at so we could really capitalize on those consumer trends to talk about, okay, how do we make our campaigns more efficient? How do we make our strategy more efficient so that, because these costs are not going down, right? They're going to stay at this level. Maybe we might see a leveling off at some point, but this is where we are. This is kind of our new baseline. And then if you go to Amazon, we're seeing this exact same thing. Costs are up about 50% year over year, and the average CPC is about $1.20 at the moment. Amazon still really benefits from, high purchase intent and really high returns and things of that nature. But brands are starting to see returns go down because of the increase in costs on Amazon, just like they are on Facebook. So it's really, it's good to identify these trends and say, okay, this is not just you, right? If you're a brand, you're saying, oh, my costs are going up, what's happening? Agency, what's happening? Whoever, what's happening? This is not just you. This is across the board. This is everyone absolutely everybody is experiencing this, but it's one thing to state the problem, and we're not just going to be like, hey, this is a giant problem, good luck solving it. But we wanted to give you some kind of tips and tricks and tactics that we're recommending, and we're actually seeing some success with on how do you mitigate this, right? Because if this is our new baseline and everything costs more, that means we have to be more efficient. So Jonny, could you just touch on some of the things that we're seeing success with to make our clients' campaigns just even more efficient so that we aren't just losing return every dollar that we spend?
Sure. I know this is a frustrating problem for everybody.
Yes.
I think it's, especially since it's come a little more suddenly. I think, stepping back a few years ago, we would say, okay, eventually we would expect this trend, as more, they're essentially auctions. So as more brands come into play, obviously the costs are going to go up. Did we expect them to rise so quickly? No. And this is coinciding with what we're talking about with different shopping behavior in Q4 and holiday. It's also coinciding with some big changes in privacy, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. So there are a lot of different factors that are coming into play in our consideration of how to mitigate rising costs. So the easy and simple solution, number one, is just being, again, objective about your media mix. So just looking at the data, putting aside what's worked in the past and what we've been able to rely on for years, that being, in large part for a lot of brands, paid search through Google, and paid social through Facebook and Instagram, and some programmatic display and things of that nature. And not to say back up completely, from your investment in Google and Facebook. Those are still going to be powerful platforms that are still growing in usage, adoption, advertising. Now, if you have the same budget as you did last year, chances are you're going to be paying a lot more for the same return that you would expect. So what can we look at? So comparing 2019 to 2020, while kind of a weird comparison because of a lot of anomalies and being in the peak of the pandemic, we know that conversions dropped. Not a huge amount, but in aggregate, we're looking at anywhere from a 2 to 4% drop in conversion rates across e-commerce brands from 2019 to 2020. There are a lot of factors in there, but what are things that we can, what are levers that we can pull, tactics that we can look at to, start to make changes in the conversion rate so that your return on ad spend, if we're talking about paid media, which we are in this instance, can be maximized. So we're looking at a lot of things like CRO testing. Yep. Personalization has come up a lot. A user in 2020 is on average expecting about 6 or is emitting 6.3 average touch points before a conversion, whereas in 2019 it was 5, which again doesn't seem like a big difference, but if you kind of look at that from a macro perspective, that is 1.3 more touch points that you have to now consider. So that can be your advertising, that could be your earned owned media, that could be your website personalization. Yep. So all those things need to be considered in how to mitigate the effect of these rising costs. And I do want to go back to the point you made about Amazon, a bit ago, that it is about 73% of consumers are starting their shopping journey on Amazon. So if you're one of those brands that say, no, traditionally our D2C site has been able to emit a big return based on our Google and Facebook advertising, but those costs are rising up, the answer may not be the advertising or the owned media for your D2C site. It may be putting more effort, more advertising dollars, more planning behind Amazon. But those all need to be decisions that are made from the data, and really looking at and saying, my brand is unique. I know I can't rely on what I had before. If I step back and look at this, what are the best things to do in these scenarios?
So don't say, well, last year.
Yes, exactly. That is a great point, because we don't know what's going to happen necessarily in the next few months. Yeah. And even, once we hit Q1, like nothing, it's really a great age to be fluid, test things out, to be smart, to really rely, on your data. And lastly, I do want to point out that, I said that we would sound like a broken record. We would sound redundant in a few of these things. But, to mitigate rising costs, it may not be you find one winner. It may be several. So we've seen, increased efficacy in Snapchat campaigns, in Pinterest. Those are not new platforms, but because of the rising costs, especially on the Google and Facebook side, we have seen increasing efficacy in those. TikTok users absolutely. If we look at the graph to the right, you are seeing Instagram is still grow, but not to the rate that, in this instance, Snapchat and TikTok users are growing. So it really is looking at, the kind of the diversification of your media mix and how you're pushing that out. And I also want to kind of point out, the usage of owned and earned media, right? We've seen a big increase in popularity in things like SEO and PR because they're essentially free platforms to gain net new traffic and conversion. So while that may have been, kind of seen as a operational waste of effort, or we need to activate our PR team or PR partner or our developers, brands are really saying, we know that even if we spend 50% more this year, we're going to get the same return. Let's look at things like SEO, PR areas that we can, start to get some free traffic and conversion. So, those are just some kind of, tips and things that we're seeing from the shift in the industry. Now, we do want to get into some tangible tactics.
Yeah.
Right. What, if we were to kind of take away and, think about, okay, these trends are great. They're insightful. But you're like, okay, what can we actually do? We don't have double the budget to spend. We can't activate a brand new, Snapchat campaign right now. The holidays are looming. Consumer behavior is changing week to week. What do we need to look at as far as tactical? So I want to go back to shipping and operations as kind of the first tactical operational thing that brands really need to focus on, because as a e-commerce brand, or let's put this to all brands, the guaranteeing of your product is really the value of your brand. Like we said before, users are not necessarily trusting brands or brand loyal. Let's put it that way. They are a little bit more agnostic in choosing the purchase. I mean, I think anybody in the last few years that's experienced, a Secret Santa, or has a friend that's a Christmas baby like me, or, Hanukkah giving, or, different holiday giving right now. A lot of the conversation when you open a present or a gift is, oh, what's this brand? Where did you get this? It's a conversation around kind of that being net new. So the brands that maybe seem like minor brands right now, they can guarantee shipping, they can guarantee product, may beat out behemoths that we would expect to do really well. I think a really important stat from 2019 to 2020 is that there was an 85% delivery rate in 2020 compared to a 95% delivery rate in 2019. Wow. And that's a really, really big percentage if you think of, because I don't think, unless we're doing a last minute shopping where we know there's a risk, where it's like December, we're like, I don't know, it's going to get here. In times past, I remember printing out a picture and being like, so sorry, it's late. Here's what you can expect in a couple days. Now we don't know if we can rely on it, right? Even if we're buying something in November. So we really have to look at how we are messaging, how we are reevaluating, our partners that are doing warehousing, that are doing supply chain management, that are, that we're buying our raw materials from. And I would say that, some of the easy tactics are to, again, explain overtly what your brand can offer. So one of the things that has come up in the industry is, if you buy now, when can you return it, or when can you expect it by? So, we've heard, a few vendors or a few brands come up with, any item purchased over mid-October can be returned by mid-January. So that even past that holiday, you're purchasing it way earlier on, and oftentimes that return is only a 30-day window. It's not even the time you're going to give the gift yet. By the time from mid to October to mid-November. So I would say, messaging like that, backing up plan with providers. So making sure that if you are not able to guarantee anything, you are messaging either through SMS or email, things like that, to let users know what they can expect. And then lastly, not lastly, but secondarily to that point, promotion and messaging. So I know that you have some pretty great ideas, I think, on how we should probably switch promoting, products, brands, et cetera, this year. But I think, starting with your traditional promotions is an okay thing to do. That's what you have the infrastructure for. You probably have messaging from last year that's already brand approved. I think really what we want to say, or the message that we're trying to bring from this webinar is that traditional promotions, traditional methods may work, but don't rely on them too much. Tap into the sense of urgency, tap into the exclusivity of buying now. Like Megan said, Google status 31% of users have either already done all their holiday buying or are in the process of doing so. So I think VIP type messaging is a good tactic. And really focusing on those major shopping days digitally is still a good traditional, promotional time. And there are also some, non-traditional things that we want to look at. We've talked about shopping. We know that 2-day free shipping increases conversion rate almost 100% in some instances. Last minute gift ideas. So we know from last year's buying behavior, the gift guides are always a good idea. Buy now, pay later. Gen Zs and millennials are really starting to drive that conversation. So think about those like non-traditional promotions that are not like, hey, buy now, 20% discount, or, Black Friday messaging. I think all of those are good tactics if you can, if you can swing them. It's a funny way of putting it, but if you can. But I think there are a lot of other considerations as far as like visualization of how you're connecting with users, creative even. So do you want to talk a little bit about, what we're seeing more from like this shift in how we're portraying brands, not just what we're saying or what promotions we're able to offer, and what your take is on how brands can kind of utilize different creative and testing? Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, what you said too about promotions, I think is really important, because if people are running, and we're seeing brands saying like, we're going to have fulfillment issues. We're not going to be able to even fulfill all of our orders. How can we possibly offer promotions? How can we possibly offer discounts? So thinking through those other more unique things. And the one thing one of our brands tried too, which was really impactful, is charity messaging too, right? Like if you buy now, we'll give to a charity. Consumers, especially Gen Z and Millennial, are increasingly looking to brands to make a difference. And that can be something, why buy from you versus Amazon, right? Because Amazon is busy going to space, and you're going to give homeless kids food or whatever it might be. I think thinking about why people also would buy from you versus from Amazon too, those are the things, like that's kind of what we're competing with. If you have a .com and you have an Amazon presence, you're competing against Amazon in some way, shape, or form. So, but on the creative piece, there's a lot of things that we can do. I mean, one of the things that you touched on when we were talking about the rising costs was, we have to increase click-through rates. Like that's number one, right? If you can increase your click-through rates, if you can increase your conversion rates, then we can offset some of these increasing costs. And I really think when we think about creative, especially upper and mid-funnel, really leaning into those, I said it before, the advertainment style creatives, really leaning into influencers and UGC, and really focusing on those types of assets that will be extremely engaging, get people to your .com. I think that is the thing to really focus on. One of the points that you touched on was, people are less brand loyal. Generic searches are increasing so much. People are looking to social for discovery and inspiration. So you really need to look at your assets and look at them and say, are these inspiring? Is this just a traditional, no offense, boring ad unit, and this is the same thing we've always done? Or is it actually inspiring action? And do your best. I know it's a lot to say, we'll go just redo all of your creative end of August for your holiday September gift guide launch or whatever it might be. But there's ways to do it in a really easy but personalized way, because personalization, not just on site, which is important, but through creative will also be really important. Let's make sure that we have your top sellers on your ads. Let's make sure we look at what gifted really well last year, right? What were the categories? What were the products that did really well last year? Let's make sure to focus on those ones too, because I think that will be really impactful. And try to personalize those, right? You have personas. I'm sure you do. I've heard about, for all of our brands, here's persona 1, 2, 3. Each one of your personas is going to be inspired by something else. If you're sending me a gift guide and Jonny a gift guide, it cannot be the same one, right? We are going to both resonate with different things, different imagery. So do your best to identify some of those nuances in your customers, and not just say, okay, where do we reach them? But then how do we actually reach them? What are the products we should focus on? What are the types of ads we should focus on? And it could be as simple as that. We don't have to go out and do a whole new video shoot shoot right now, I would not recommend it unless you're just like sitting around twiddling your thumbs right now, like having nothing to do, which I don't think any of us really are. And then the third thing is do try to do more with less. Yes, it would be great if we could go out and make all of these new assets and make everything super personalized, but it's just not realistic. So really look to what you can repurpose. Do you have UGC content? Do you have influencer content that you could just repurpose for both Reels and TikTok, right? They don't need their own creative necessarily. So many social platforms are just iterating on each other, right? Everybody has stories now. What are the story assets that you could maybe repurpose? How can you just like cut them up a little bit differently or add different CTAs or whatever it might be? So yes, I do want you to personalize, but I also think like we're all limited, we're all time constrained, we're all resource constrained. So look and say, what are the common themes of each of these platforms? What do we need to hone in on? Does it need to be more native? Does it need to be more high quality produced? How do I repurpose that for YouTube, TikTok, Reels, CTV, Google Display, whatever it might be, and do your best to do more with your resources. And then one of the final points we'll make, we have a couple more, is gift guides. We touched on holiday shopping is going to start earlier. We're already seeing it. 31% of people started in June, just insane to me. But we're going to see the same thing with gifts and gift guides, right? The stat or the chart here shows kind of where we are and how the search for gifts and gift guides pretty much just starts picking up from here on out. And I think that's really, really important for us to know, because gift guides, and the thing that's really important about gift guides is that they all have research intent, right? So if people are going to start doing research now, we want to make sure that we're capturing that research intent on our .com and on our D2C sites. So make sure to get your gift guide live as soon as possible. I would say maybe even like September, if it is at all doable. We can talk a little bit more about timeline later. Make sure that's the focus of your ads, right? When you're going up to those mega sale days. I love the point about, okay, tap into that sense of community and offer a pre-mega sale day, pre-Black Friday for your VIP customers. You encourage them to engage with your brands. You encourage more mega sale day purchasers. And then hopefully it does quite well. We've seen a lot of success there. But leading up to that, you need to make sure the gift guide is the focus, because that's when people are doing research. You're not buying anything on the day before Black Friday. Wait, is that Thanksgiving? Then maybe you are.
Maybe.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe.
The day before Thanksgiving, you are not buying anything, right? You are maybe I'm researching, driving home, my husband's driving home, I'm like half listening to him on my phone being like, what are the gift guys saying? What's going to be on sale? And I make a mental checklist and say, okay, what am I going to purchase tomorrow or the following day or whatever it might be? So really make sure that that is the focus of your ads leading up to those mega sale days. And also make sure, and we're going to touch a little bit about KPIs next, that your KPIs are aligned for those things too, right? Those are not maybe immediate return driven things leading up to this big shopping day. So you got to make sure you don't kind of mess with yourself or shoot yourself in the foot right there. The other point I would say is last year was a big self-gifting year, and this year is going to be the same. Yeah. So ensure if you have gift guides, there's a gift for me or some version of gifting to increase basket size, encourage people to give back or give themselves something a little bit extra too. And I think that's really important because people are getting back out there. They're traveling, they're seeing friends. So people are looking for little new things for themselves. Like, I don't know what the style is anymore. I'm kind of like, oh my God, what do people wear nowadays? Other than this, like I see people on the street with really nice new clothing. I was like, oh my God, I have to, in the 18-month pandemic, I've completely lost track of what is fashionable outside of leggings. So really looking and targeting me and saying, okay, gift for your mom, gift for your best friend, maybe a little bit something for yourself too, which I think is important. And then one of the last points I'm going to make about gift guides is make sure that you have a banner, if possible, on your website that really lives in a very prominent place really all across your website. You don't necessarily just want a very small like gift guides and like your top menu navigation or anything like that. You want something that's very big and prominent, so when somebody is searching, they can easily find and click on gift guides, or maybe it's gift for her, a gift for him, or whatever it might be. If you do have the option to put that up across your site, I would highly recommend it. We've seen a lot of really great engagement, again, increasing basket sizes, etc. So highly recommended. And then Jonny, do you want to talk a little bit about, like we talked about getting gift guides live like in a couple of weeks, KPIs changing. Could you talk about what that's going to look like and some tactics there?
Yeah, I mean, I can't state it enough. We have to start now, or we have to start in the next few weeks. Gift guides are, somebody has to produce that content, and in a lot of ways, like I expect a brand to create a gift guide, host it on their site, or, have some sort of, piece of sponsored content where they're going to talk about competitors. Obviously, it's probably going to be angled a little bit more towards their brand, but there needs to be research. So it's going to take time. Somebody's going to have to write it. There's approval processes. If it's being utilized for things like native display or sponsored content, those are all things that take time, that require buy-in from probably multiple, entities within a brand. So we have to start early. To that point of gift guides last year and what we learned, that, more or less the metric from Google was that's starting in mid to late September. Now we're in August. So maybe next year we have to start in July. We don't want to assume anything. And I also want to say this point that we understand that every brand, every marketer is not going to be able to completely turn their media mix on its head. There are some simple things, like you just said, paying attention to your messaging and your creative or your banners on your website, utilizing things that are already owned in order to push forth holiday messaging. To the point about TikTok, if you're not already on TikTok, chances are you're on Facebook and Instagram. And Instagram Reels are almost identical to a lot of TikTok content. So you can utilize the content that you're putting forth on Instagram Reels and then port it over and see if it works on TikTok. So there are, less time intensive, less heavy bandwidth, less investment, heavy tactics that brands can start doing now. And then if those start to work and you build upon them, you can start hedging your bets and say, let's take a big gamble on something. And that may roll into a whole new plan in Q1. That could be the winner that takes you through your 2022 plan. So I think that's really an important point. And I think you made some great points of how to utilize your own creative, your gift guides. Those are pretty bandwidth light things to do, but do require a buy-in, a plan now.
Yep.
And then I think your point about KPIs is a really, really, really important one. And this bleeds into what we're going to talk about, in regards to privacy in a moment. Don't just look for the conversion. This should not all be ROAS driven. Micro conversions, email signups, we cannot understate the value of first-party data. I'll say it again. Do not undervalue the importance of first-party data, because that is what you're going to be left with by and large very soon if you're not completely already. Now, the email capture is generally done for things like newsletters, is done for promotions. There are different, I'm not going to get into everything involved with, the use of interstitial and what provides a good user experience and a bad user experience, but the email capture is an important facet, and there has to be a lot of panache between, or in the way that you push that on the site or through email. But that is going to be where you get, you are able to utilize first-party data to build lookalike audiences when it's time for down funnel tactics, like in a month or so. That's where you're going to get, a lot of efficiencies in your return. Again, Google, Facebook are only going up in cost. So having as many levers as you can pull to make data-driven decisions, and again, understanding that most brands, most marketers cannot completely refresh their marketing mix right now. You're going to have to find ways to build efficiency. So I think that email capture is important. It also bleeds into the whole thing about personalization, how you're re-engaging, like not doing the hard sell, discoverability, things of that nature. So I think there are a lot of things that we put forth here tactically, or, that brands and marketers should consider. But there are different stepping stones to this. And I think at the very least, this has to be considered. At the very least. And I think, being more consumer focused than brand focused towards yourself or big tech platform focus is really going to be what's important, right? Be agnostic, be fluid. Be organic in the way that you're connecting with consumers, and provide genuine value and transparency. We have a slew of common questions that come to us from advertisers when planning for holiday or any big event. But I think a lot of them are, what if we don't fall into that category? Which hopefully we've answered some of those questions. But I think transparency is key in a lot of these. So lastly, we want to talk about privacy considerations. I just touched on it when we're talking about first-party data, email capture. And this may seem like a very odd thing to bring up at the end of a holiday webinar, but this is happening in the midst of wildly changing consumer behavior, increased costs, questions about the supply chain, brands not even being sure what they can guarantee. I think there's a lot kind of culminating together and making this perfect storm. And again, I think it goes back to there's going to be some brands that come out of this victorious and some brands that do not. And I think it's really going to come down to the fluidity of those brands, unless of course you may fall in the category if you're a brand that can afford to just keep spending more and more and getting the same return. But for the lion's share of brands out there, and especially emerging brands, it is going to require some quick pivots. So privacy considerations. So I think the biggest thing, and this graph model is from 2020 and kind of bleeding into 2021 and 2022 and the projections there. But what we've been seeing, from our own client roster, from the industry, from talking through, our network and our, tech platform partners, is that, Facebook is definitely taking the brunt of this, but Google's not very far behind. So I don't want to say like, you're seeing more expensive ad costs in Facebook, that should be ported over to Google. I think in most instances, that's not the answer. And it's not necessarily the case for every brand. Some brands, it's Google getting hit harder than Facebook. But in aggregate, Facebook, Google very, very close behind, are seeing losses in revenue, but also that is bleeding into increased cost for advertisers. So where we would expect, there's going to be a migration off of those platforms for some, the auctions are going to be cheaper. That has not happened. And, CPMs continue to rise even with the lack of data from some of these privacy updates. So we're seeing increased costs. We have less insight into why that's happening, less insight into what consumers, their behavior is on these platforms and across device. So I think, there's a lot of considerations that as we look at holiday, we also need to consider that holiday to Q1 happens almost overnight. And again, like we said right now, we're not telling anybody to completely mix up their channel selection right now. Same thing is going to be true once we get on the other side of holiday. Probably not going to have the time to just mix it all up again. So as we look at the rising costs and projected to continue to increase, maybe at a slow down rate through 2022, don't assume the solution is learning how to be more efficient on these platforms, because that may not be available. I think, and also don't assume user adoption is going to go down. So on this next visual, we're seeing 2/3 of users don't want to be tracked. And, this is from iOS, but, looking at, opt-in, opt-out, it's a majority of people want their privacy. And I get that. When that update came through, at least for me, I kind of passively like, oh, okay, I guess don't track. And then it happened so often in my operating system kept updating. I was like, wow, I didn't realize how much they were tracking. And I started to go back and say, actually, I don't want any of this to be tracked. There's no reason. I can figure out the personalization on my own. I can figure out which, apps need location data when turned on. But there's, in my mind, none of them should need always turned on unless it's, maybe, a fitness app for running or something like that. But, I think, going from the increase in auction expenses, investing into big platforms that most brands could rely on, to user adoption, wondering, okay, maybe the users won't adopt this as heavily as we'd hope. I think most brands would say, yes, we respect user privacy and everything else. However, it does mean potentially a loss of revenue. So to your point about, being brand loyal or, utilizing Amazon instead of charities, consumers or people in a lot of cases are altruistic until they're not, right? We don't want to assume anything, and we want to assume that they're looking for convenience first and foremost, and looking out for, their own privacy. Yeah. So, I think with iOS 15 looming over us and more, we're going to go through some of the new updates that are happening. Brands should be, really have a good first-party data plan in place. They should be mixing up, their channel selection because these trends are only going to continue to grow and grow and grow. And just kind of pinpoint what I was talking about as far as, what we can expect, at least in the near future. What do we know about like the updates for iOS 15? Mm-hmm. There's mail privacy protection. There's app privacy reports. So now, where only a few years ago, I think there was a Netflix documentary on somebody suing for the rights to understand what data was being collected. Now Apple's actually going to, give up that information on request. So all the apps are going to have to provide that transparency as a boilerplate. There's things like focus mode, which gives the users to, it's even different than, do not disturb, where if you have push notifications set up standardly, they're going to continuously do that. Now you have focus mode where you can actually go back and say, for this time period, I don't want push notifications. So there are even more areas where those brand interactions and things that we utilize to get in front of users are going to become less available with these updates. iCloud Plus users are going to have, even more, privacy options. So I think, I'm not going to go through every one and the specifics of each, but these are all pointing towards more privacy options for users. So, while we may be scrambling now, or brands are scrambling now to say, okay, what are we going to do in a cookieless world? There's even more privacy and more kind of like, the consumers are going to go behind the veil even more. So utilizing the data that we do have in a very smart way while honoring users' privacy is going to be an important point for all brands, for all marketers to come into play. And then just looking at like mitigating the effect of all of this. And I think this is right now in the midst of holiday. I think this is holiday to Q1 planning. I think the most important points are, is going to be, taking a step back and being objective, avoiding groupthink as much as possible when looking at your channel mix, whether to capitalize on holiday trends or to mitigate the effect of these privacy updates. Investing in probabilistic modeling, that's a mouthful. Probabilistic modeling, and also understanding that if you invest in an MMP, probabilistic modeling has been included in most of those since the iOS update. So whatever route you choose to do, whether that be homegrown, there's a lot of benefits to onboarding an MMP outside of this anyway. Really kind of beefing up how you are probabilistically or from a data collection standpoint, looking at not just resting on your laurels and what's worked in the past. And lastly, and we stated this before and we'll state it again, just building a heck of a strong first-party data strategy, and really looking at not just ROAS, not looking at return on ad spend for everything, ROI, but also looking at the value of micro conversions, of email capture, of how you're engaging with users from the top and mid funnel, and allowing them the time to digest what your brand has to offer, being a natural resource, utilizing UGC. So it's not just you stating it to consumers, but allowing other users that have interacted with your brand or purchased or whatever converting action they've taken to kind of sign off on what your product or your offering is. So I think those are all really important points to say that all of this is coming to a head at the same time. Again, not that our webinar title is the best thing that anybody's ever come up with, but it is not your average Q4. It's not going to be your average Q1. It's not going to be your average 2022 or average year.
So we did just want to give everybody a quick recap. We've been talking for just about an hour now, and there's been a lot obviously going on. So we want to leave you with some of the big takeaways. First and foremost, you have to start planning now, pretty much. If you haven't had a planning meeting internally or with your agency, you need to get that on the books ASAP. If you don't know what your promo schedule looks like, that is urgent number one, essentially. Second point, reconsider your top and mid funnel campaigns and KPIs just to make sure that you're capturing that browsing and that research intent. We've talked about it a lot. You cannot just be very ROAS focused. You are going to shoot yourselves in the foot. Look at GA. What are the things that lead to eventual return, time on site, session duration, email capture that first party data, ask people to sign up to get exclusive offers. Hey, do you want access to our Black Friday, Cyber Monday sale 2 days early? Yes, I do. Give them a reason to sign up there. That is, I think, going to be really, really important. Highlight your ability to fulfill, especially when it comes to shipping and timing and guarantees. This is going to be big. We've seen massive increases. People expect fast, free shipping now, so make sure you state it very overtly. If not, you're going to have upset consumers. Yeah. I get very mad when somebody says it's going to be here on Friday and it's not here on Friday. That just, as unbrand loyal as people are, you cannot give them a reason to have another negative brand experience with you. Ensure your e-com and your Amazon are working really well together. Like we said, there have been conversion rate dips. A lot of that could be because people are browsing your .com and then buying on Amazon. So you need to make sure, if you're a marketer and you only work on your .com, you have another sales team or whoever it is that works on Amazon, you have to work really closely together. Make sure you have 100% share of voice. Do you have Amazon attribution set up? All of these things are really important. We've even seen a brand last year when they got too late in the holiday season and they couldn't fulfill on their .com, they redirected people to Amazon. So they still were able to capture that first party data, people on the site, but then they sent people to Amazon because they knew they wouldn't fulfill on time. They'd upset the consumer. That person will go somewhere else. You do need to have a really holistic strategy. Traditional promotions aren't going to necessarily differentiate anymore. It's expected. 25% off everything. What are the things that are really going to make you stand out as a consumer or as a brand? And then finally, prepare for a cookieless world. This is a longer term solution, but it is extremely, extremely important. It's going to keep affecting us. We're going to keep seeing the repercussions of this. So that's about it for us today. We are actually just about at time. We did have a lot of really amazing questions come in. We'll make sure to respond to those via email. But if you did have any other questions that you wanted to get answered, please feel free to email marketing@directagents.com and we'll make sure to get back to you. But thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and good luck in Q4.